The red warning lights flashed across the bridge of the Starlight Dawn, painting shadows that danced across Captain Jai-Ho's pale blue skin. His antenna twitched nervously as he stared at the main screen, which showed nothing but unfamiliar stars scattered across the endless void of space. The ship's navigation system had failed 6 hours ago, and now they were completely lost in an unmapped region of space. "Status report," Jai-Ho called out, his voice steady despite the growing worry in his chest. As an Illyrian, he was proud of his species' reputation for staying calm and logical in any situation. But right now, that reputation was being tested. First Officer Hannah looked up from her control panel, her silver eyes reflecting the emergency lights. "Captain, the main AI is still giving us conflicting readings. According to one sensor, we're in Sector 7, but another says we're somewhere near the edge territories. That's impossible. Those regions are light years apart." Jai-Ho walked over to her station, his lightweight frame moving gracefully in the ship's artificial gravity. The Starlight Dawn was one of the most advanced exploration vessels in the Galactic Federation's fleet. Its AI system was supposed to be foolproof. Yet here they were, lost in space like ancient sailors who had lost their compass. "Engineering reports the backup systems are also malfunctioning," reported Tayri from her communication station. Her purple uniform was wrinkled from the long hours of trying to solve their crisis. "And, sir, we have another problem. Life support is starting to show strain. We have maybe 4 days of supplies left." The bridge fell silent. 4 days wasn't much time to figure out where they were and how to get back to known space. Jai-Ho looked around at his crew. They were all Nilarians like him, tall, blue-skinned, with antennae that helped them sense electromagnetic fields. They were brilliant with technology, but right now, all their advanced knowledge wasn't helping. Hannah suddenly stood up, her antenna pointing forward, a sign of excitement or important thought among their people. "Captain, I have an idea. It's unusual, but given our situation." "Go on," Jai-Ho encouraged. At this point, he was ready to consider anything. "We could call the humans for help," she said quickly, like someone removing a bandage fast to get the pain over with. Several crew members gasped. Humans were new to the Galactic Federation. They came from a planet called Earth, a death world with high gravity, extreme weather, and countless predators. The humans themselves were considered dangerous by many species. They were stronger, faster, and more aggressive than most galactic citizens, built by evolution to survive conditions that would kill most sentient beings. "A human on our ship?" Tayri asked, her voice shaking slightly. Jai-Ho raised his hand for silence. "Tell me more, Hannah. Why a human?" "I've been studying their navigation techniques. They have this thing called intuition. It's like they can sense when something is wrong, even when all the data says everything is fine. And they're incredibly good at surviving lost-in-space scenarios. Their whole history is full of stories about finding their way in unknown territories." Jai-Ho walked to the main viewport, watching the strange stars twinkle. His logical mind warred with desperation. Bringing a Deathworlder aboard went against all his training and instincts, but they were running out of options and time. "Do we have any human navigation experts within range?" he asked finally. Hannah quickly checked her console. "Yes, sir. There's a human station 3 light jumps from our last known position. They have a navigator there who specializes in rescue operations." Jai-Ho took a deep breath. "Send the distress call. Make it clear we need navigation assistance." He looked around at his nervous crew. "We're about to meet our first human." Sun Ki was eating his lunch when the emergency call came in. He sat in the observation deck of Station 7, a sandwich halfway to his mouth, watching the stars through the reinforced windows. The station's artificial gravity was set to match most alien species' comfort levels, which meant Sun Ki felt like he was almost floating. He didn't mind. After 5 years in space, he had gotten used to it. "Navigator Sun Ki," the station's AI announced, "incoming emergency transmission from the galactic exploration vessel Starlight Dawn. Priority level, urgent." Sun Ki put down his sandwich and sat up straight. Play it. A holographic screen appeared in front of him, showing a blue-skinned alien with gentle antennae. This is Captain Jai-Ho of the Starlight Dawn. We are lost in an unmapped region with failing navigation systems. We request immediate assistance from Navigator Sun Ki, if available. A small smile crossed Sun Ki's face. This wasn't the first time he'd gotten such a call. Many aliens didn't like working with humans, but they sure came running when they needed help. He pressed the response button. This is Navigator Sun Ki. I can be ready to help in 30 minutes. The relief on Captain Jai-Ho's face was clear, even across species. Thank you, Navigator. We will send our last known coordinates. As Sun Ki packed his emergency kit, his station commander, a tall insectoid named Rita, clicked her mandibles nervously. Are you sure about this, Sun Ki? The Nilarians are sensitive. They get nervous around humans. They're also lost and running out of options, Sun Ki replied, checking his personal navigation tools. He had learned early on not to rely only on alien technology. Sometimes the old ways, the human ways, worked better. Besides, I'm used to aliens being nervous around me. Just try not to frighten them, Rita said. No sudden movements. No showing teeth when you smile. And please, don't do any of those crazy human things you're famous for. Sun Ki laughed as he packed his ancient compass, a gift from his grandmother. Define crazy human things. You know what I mean. That time you manually piloted a ship through an asteroid field, or when you used your own body weight to test artificial gravity fluctuations. The stories about you make some species faint. Those crazy things saved lives, Sun Ki pointed out. He finished packing and stood up, automatically compensating for the light gravity. And sometimes, the crazy solution is the right solution. The rescue shuttle was ready in the landing bay. It was a small ship, built for speed and maneuverability. Sun Ki did his pre-flight checks while reviewing the Starlight Dawn's last known coordinates. Something about them seemed odd, but he couldn't put his finger on what. That was his human intuition talking. Another thing that made aliens nervous. As he prepared for launch, he received a final message from the Starlight Dawn. The ship's first officer, Hannah, appeared on screen. Navigator Sun Ki, I should warn you, some of our crew have never met a human before. Don't worry, Sun Ki said, keeping his voice gentle and trying not to show his teeth when he smiled. I'll be on my best behavior. The journey to the Starlight Dawn's location took 3 hours. Sun Ki spent the time studying the ship's specifications and the area where they were lost. He noticed something interesting. The region they were in had been marked as navigationally unstable in some very old Earth sailing records. Modern ships usually ignored such outdated warnings, but Sun Ki had learned that ancient sailors often knew things that modern sensors missed. As his shuttle approached the Starlight Dawn, he got his first good look at the ship. It was beautiful, sleek, and silver, built with the Nilarians' famous attention to detail. But something about the way it floated in space seemed wrong. The ship was drifting in a pattern that didn't match any known gravitational effects. Starlight Dawn, this is Navigator Sun Ki, requesting permission to dock. There was a pause before Captain Jai-Ho's voice came through. Permission granted, Navigator. Please use Docking Bay 3. And welcome. Sun Ki guided his shuttle toward the docking bay, already forming theories about what might have gone wrong. One thing was certain, this wasn't going to be a simple navigation problem. But that was fine with him. After all, solving impossible problems was what humans did best. Time to show them what a Deathworlder can do. He muttered to himself as the docking clamps engaged. He double-checked his equipment one last time and prepared to board the Starlight Dawn. Captain Jai-Ho stood at the docking bay entrance with First Officer Hannah and Security Chief Dae-Sung. All three of them tried not to flinch when they heard the heavy footsteps coming from the other side of the airlock. The sound reminded them that humans were built for a planet with much stronger gravity than their own world. The airlock door opened with a soft hiss. Sun Ki stepped through, and the three Nilarians unconsciously took a small step back. He was shorter than them, but his strong build made him look powerful and solid compared to their slim frames. He carried a black bag over his shoulder and wore a standard Federation uniform that seemed to stretch across his muscular shoulders. "Welcome aboard the Starlight Dawn," Jai-Ho said, proud that his voice remained steady. "I am Captain Jai-Ho." Sun Ki nodded and carefully kept his hands visible. He had dealt with nervous aliens before and knew how to appear less threatening. "Thank you, Captain. I hope I can help solve your navigation problems." Hannah's antenna twitched with interest as she studied the human. She had read about humans, but had never seen one up close. "Your footsteps," she said before she could stop herself. "They're very heavy." Sun Ki smiled without showing his teeth. "Sorry about that. Earth's gravity is about twice what you're used to. I can try to walk more lightly." Security Chief Dae-sung's hand stayed close to his stun baton, but he tried to hide his nervousness. "We should go to the bridge," he suggested. "The captain can explain our situation there." As they walked through the corridors, crew members stopped to stare at Sun Ki. Some quickly entered side rooms or pressed themselves against walls to avoid getting too close. Sun Ki pretended not to notice, but he slowed his pace and made his movements more deliberate and smooth. "Your ship is beautiful," Sun Ki said, trying to ease the tension. "Nilarian engineering is famous throughout the galaxy." "Thank you," Jai-Ho replied, starting to relax a little. This human seemed polite and professional, not at all like the wild creatures some stories described. "Though right now, our famous engineering isn't helping us much." They reached the bridge, and Sun Ki immediately noticed how the crew tensed at his presence. He stayed near the door, giving them space. "Could you show me your navigation readings from when the problem started?" Hannah brought up the data on the main screen. As she worked, her curiosity began to overcome her fear. "The readings make no sense. It's like we're in two places at once." Sun Ki studied the screen, his eyes narrowing. He took something from his bag that made several crew members gasp. It looked like a simple metal compass in a wooden box. "Is that primitive Earth technology?" Dae-sung asked, unable to hide his surprise. "Sometimes old technology sees things that new technology misses," Sun Ki explained. He held up the compass and walked slowly around the bridge. The crew watched in fascination as he stopped at different points, checking readings and making notes on his tablet. "That's interesting," he muttered, mostly to himself. "What is it?" Jai-Ho asked, moving closer despite his instincts telling him to keep his distance. "Your ship's AI isn't malfunctioning," Sun Ki said. "It's actually working perfectly. Too perfectly, in fact." He looked up at the captain. "That's the problem." Hannah's antenna perked forward. "I don't understand." Sun Ki carefully put his compass away. "Your sensors are designed to be extremely precise, to detect and measure everything perfectly. But space isn't perfect. Sometimes it's messy, chaotic, and strange. Humans learned this the hard way during our early space exploration." The bridge crew listened intently, their fear temporarily forgotten as their natural scientific curiosity took over. Even Dae-sung had moved his hand away from his stun baton. "So what's really happening to our ship?" Jai-Ho asked. Sun Ki walked to the main viewport, his movements now more natural, as he forgot to make them deliberately gentle. "Your ship has wandered into what we humans used to call a ghost zone, a region of space where normal rules don't quite apply. Your precise instruments are trying to make sense of it, but they can't. That's why they're giving you impossible readings." The crew looked at each other, a mixture of worry and fascination on their faces. Their human guest was turning out to be full of surprises, and this was only the beginning. "A ghost zone." Captain Jai-Ho repeated the strange human term with confusion. "There's no such thing in our scientific records." Sun Ki connected his tablet to the ship's main computer. Unlike the elegant touch displays the Nilarians used, his tablet was covered in a thick protective case, another reminder of humanity's need to make things sturdy. Earth ships discovered these zones during our early space exploration. We lost several ships before we learned to recognize the signs. Hana moved closer to look at his screen, her natural curiosity winning over her caution. But how can a region of space just not follow normal rules? Think of it like a whirlpool in the ocean. Sun Ki explained, bringing up a simple diagram. From far away, the ocean looks calm. But get too close, and suddenly normal navigation becomes impossible. These space zones work the same way. The bridge crew gathered around, maintaining a careful distance but clearly interested. Sun Ki pulled out his compass again and held it up to various screens showing their sensor data. Look here, he pointed to a particular reading. Your AI is detecting something, but it's programmed to only report things that make logical sense. It's like trying to describe a color to someone who can't see it. Daesung frowned. But how can your primitive compass help when our advanced sensors can't? Because it's not trying to be perfect, Sun Ki said with a patient smile. Sometimes imperfect tools give you a better picture of an imperfect situation. Watch this. He walked to different parts of the bridge, holding his compass. Notice how it doesn't point consistently in any direction. That's because the magnetic fields in this region are twisted. He pulled up an old Earth navigation chart on his tablet. These zones appear in old Earth sailing records too. Sailors would report their compasses spinning wildly and their ships getting lost in perfectly clear weather. Everyone thought they were just telling stories until we started exploring space. Captain Jaiho's antenna twitched with interest. Are you saying we should navigate like ancient Earth sailors? Not exactly, Sun Ki said. He started typing commands into the ship's computer. But we can use their methods to help your eye make sense of what it's seeing. The trick is to stop trying to find a perfect path and look for patterns in the chaos instead. The main screen filled with new data as Sun Ki combined the ship's sensor readings with his own measurements. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, like a map showing currents in an invisible ocean. There, he pointed. See how the distortions form a kind of spiral? Your eye couldn't see it because it was looking for straight lines and exact coordinates. But if we think of it like a storm system, Hannah's eyes widened. We can plot a course around it. Exactly, Sun Ki nodded. Human ships learned to treat these zones like weather systems in space. You don't try to fight a storm. You work with it, or you go around it. The crew watched as Sun Ki's fingers flew over his tablet, programming new parameters into their navigation system. He was teaching their AI to see space the way humans did, not as a perfect void with exact coordinates, but as something alive and ever-changing. On Earth, he continued while working, we evolved to survive in an environment that was constantly trying to kill us. We learned to trust our instincts alongside our instruments. Sometimes the path that looks wrong on paper is actually the right one. Captain Jaiho watched the new navigation display with growing understanding. So when our AI said we were in two places at once, it was actually telling the truth, Sun Ki finished. In these zones, normal space gets folded. Your sensors were picking up both locations, but your AI couldn't understand how that was possible. He made a final adjustment, and suddenly the ship's position became clear on the main screen. They weren't lost anymore. They were caught in the edges of a space phenomenon that the Nilarians' precise technology simply hadn't been able to comprehend. There's an old saying on Earth, Sun Ki said as he showed them the safe route out. Sometimes you have to get lost to find a new way home. The bridge crew looked at their human guest with new respect. Perhaps there was more to these Deathworlders than they had thought. Just as Sun Ki finished explaining the navigation route, the ship's emergency alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed across the bridge, and the floor beneath them began to vibrate. Status report. Captain Jaiho called out, his antenna straight with alarm. Something's pulling us. Hannah's fingers moved quickly over her console. The ghost zone. It's not staying stable like the old Earth records showed. It's growing. Sun Ki rushed to the main viewport. His eyes widened as he saw the stars beginning to twist in impossible patterns. "The zone is collapsing in on itself," he said, his voice calm despite the crisis. "And we're being pulled in with it." The ship's structure groaned as invisible forces tugged at it. The Nilarian crew members held onto their stations, their blue skin turning pale with fear. Their sensors were going crazy, showing readings that made no sense at all. "Engines at full reverse," Jaiho ordered. "No." Sunki's sharp command made everyone freeze. "Fighting against the pull will tear the ship apart. We need to work with it instead." "Work with it?" Dae-sung shouted. "It's trying to crush us." Sunki was already moving. His heavy footsteps echoed as he ran to the navigation console. "Captain, I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." At this point, Jaiho said as another shudder ran through the ship, "I'm open to suggestions. We need to turn off the AI navigation system completely," Sunki said, pulling out his compass again. "I'll guide us through manually." The bridge crew stared at him in shock. Manual navigation in space was something from history books. It was considered impossible with modern ships. "That's suicide," Haina protested. "No one can calculate spatial dynamics fast enough to." "Humans can," Sunki interrupted. "We've been doing it since we first went to space. Our brains evolved to track moving objects and predict paths. Right now, that's what we need. Not perfect calculations, but instinct." Another violent shake rocked the ship. Warning lights showed that the hull was starting to strain. "Captain," Sunki's voice was steady, "I know I'm asking you to trust a Deathworlder with your ship. But right now, being a Deathworlder might be exactly what saves us." Jaiho looked at his frightened crew, then at the twisting stars outside. They had called for human help. Now it was time to trust that help. "Do it." Sunki's fingers flew over the controls, shutting down the AI navigation. The ship's computer protested with a series of warnings, but he ignored them. "Everyone hold on tight." Taking manual control, Sunki began to guide the ship in what looked like a random pattern. Instead of fighting the pull of the ghost zone, he let the ship move with it, but in a controlled spiral. The Starlight Dawn spun and twisted through space in ways its designers never intended. "What are you doing?" Dae-sung asked, his voice shaking as he watched their path. "Something crazy," Sunki replied, his eyes fixed on both his compass and the viewport. "On Earth, we learned about waterspouts, tornadoes over water. If you get caught in one, you can't just pull away. But if you ride the spiral..." He made another adjustment, and the ship lurched. Several crew members cried out, but Sunki kept his focus. His hands moved across the controls like he was playing an instrument, feeling the ship's movements rather than calculating them. "Almost there," he muttered. 3, 2, 1. With a final twist of the controls, Sunki sent the ship into a spinning dive that made the hull creak in protest. For a terrifying moment, everything seemed to blur around them. Then, suddenly, they were free. The viewport showed normal, stable stars again. The ship's systems began reporting standard readings. They had escaped. "How?" Hannah whispered, looking at their position readings. "How did you know that would work?" Sunki finally relaxed his grip on the controls. "I didn't know for sure. But sometimes you have to trust your instincts. That's how we survived on Earth, and that's how we survive in space." Captain Jaiho looked at the human with new understanding. What they had first seen as primitive and dangerous was actually something remarkable. The ability to act without perfect information, to trust in skills honed by evolution on a deadly world. Perhaps being a Deathworlder wasn't such a bad thing after all. The hours after their escape were busy on the Starlight Dawn. Engineers checked the ship's systems, medical staff treated minor injuries from the rough escape, and the bridge crew tried to make sense of what had happened. Through it all, Sunki sat quietly in a corner of the bridge, writing his report on his tablet. Hannah approached him first, carrying 2 cups of hot liquid. "This is tea from our homeworld," she said, offering him one of the cups. "I thought you might like to try it." Sunki accepted the cup carefully. noting how his hands were much larger than hers. "Thank you." He took a small sip. "It's good. Reminds me of green tea from Earth." "I wanted to ask you something," Hannah said, sitting down nearby, much closer than any Nilarian had dared to come before. "When we were in danger, you didn't show any fear. Are all humans like that?" Sun Ki smiled, remembering to keep his lips closed to avoid showing his teeth. "Oh, I was scared. Humans feel fear just like everyone else. We're used to working through it." "Because of Earth?" she asked, her antenna moving forward with interest. "Yes, you see, on Earth, our ancestors had to hunt dangerous animals while watching out for other predators that might be hunting them. They had to think and act even when they were terrified. Over time, that became part of who we are." Captain Jeho joined them, having overheard the conversation. "I must admit, I had misconceptions about humans. We're taught that Deathworlders are dangerous and unpredictable." "We can be," Sun Ki agreed. "But that same unpredictability helps us find solutions that others might miss. Sometimes you need someone who thinks differently." More crew members gathered around, their earlier fear replaced by curiosity. Dae-sung, who had kept his hand near his weapon earlier, now sat cross-legged on the floor with the others. "Could you tell us more about Earth?" he asked. "Our records only talk about its harsh conditions and dangerous wildlife." Sun Ki put down his tablet. "Earth is dangerous, yes, but it's also beautiful. We have oceans deeper than some space trenches, mountains that touch the clouds, and forests that stretch for thousands of kilometers." He pulled up some images on his tablet, showing Earth's landscapes. The Nilarians leaned forward, their antennae twitching with amazement at the varied and dramatic scenes. "Our world shaped us," Sun Ki continued. "We learned to swim in those oceans, climb those mountains, and survive in those forests. Each challenge made us stronger, more adaptable." Hannah studied one of the images, a sunset over a mountain range. "It's beautiful, but it looks so harsh. How do you live in such conditions?" "We don't just live, we thrive," Sun Ki explained. "Humans can survive in almost any environment because we learn to adapt. We're not the strongest or fastest species on Earth, but we're the most adaptable." Captain Jeho nodded thoughtfully. "Like today, when you adapted our ship's sophisticated navigation systems to work with your, what did you call it? Instinct." "Exactly," Sun Ki said. "Technology is wonderful, but it shouldn't replace natural abilities. It should work with them. That's something we learned on Earth too." The conversation continued as more crew members shared their own stories and asked questions about Earth. The formal barriers began to break down, and soon they were all just people sharing experiences across the stars. Later, as the ship's day cycle was ending, Captain Jeho made a ship-wide announcement. "Today, we learned an important lesson. Our differences, even those that seem dangerous at first, can become our greatest strengths." Navigator Sun Ki's unique human perspective didn't just save our ship, it showed us a new way of thinking. Sun Ki watched as the crew nodded in agreement. The same people who had feared his heavy footsteps earlier now sat comfortably in his presence, some even mimicking human gestures they had picked up during their conversations. "Maybe that's the real purpose of the Federation," he thought to himself. "Not just to bring different species together, but to help us understand what we can learn from each other." The stars outside the viewport seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting the new understanding that had grown on the bridge of the Starlight Dawn. 2 days later, the Starlight Dawn arrived at Galactic Federation Station 12. The ship's arrival caused quite a stir, not just because they had survived a ghost zone, but because of how the Nilarian crew now interacted with their human guest. As they docked, Sun Ki stood with Captain Jeho and First Officer Hannah on the bridge. Through the viewport, they could see other ships and stations floating in the darkness of space. It looked beautiful and orderly, very different from the chaos they had faced. "The Federation Council wants a full report," Jeho said, checking his messages. "They're especially interested in how we navigated through the ghost stone. This could help other ships avoid similar dangers." Hana looked up from her station with excitement. I've already started documenting everything. The way Sun Ki combined human instincts with our technology. It's revolutionary. We should teach this to all navigation crews. Sun Ki smiled, no longer worried about showing his teeth. The crew had gotten used to human expressions. Just remember, it's not about replacing your methods. It's about adding new tools to your toolkit. The door to the bridge opened, and Dae-sung entered carrying something wrapped in shimmering cloth. Before you leave, we wanted to give you this. He handed the package to Sun Ki. Carefully unwrapping it, Sun Ki found a Nilarian navigation crystal, one of their most prized technologies. It had been modified to include a holder for his old compass. We added Earth's magnetic detection systems to our crystal's programming, Hana explained. Now it can work the way you do, using both precise calculations and natural readings. Sun Ki held the crystal carefully, touched by the gift's meaning. Thank you. This means a lot. Captain Jaiho stepped forward. I'm submitting a formal recommendation to the Federation. We need more humans in deep space exploration. Your species sees things differently, and that's exactly what we need out here. The next time someone calls humans dangerous Deathworlders, I'll tell them about you, Dae-sung added. How being different made you exactly who we needed. The station's docking crews were surprised to see the Nilarian crew helping Sun Ki carry his equipment, chatting and laughing together as if they'd known each other for years. Some even tried to walk with the heavier steps of a human, though they couldn't quite manage it. Before Sun Ki left the ship, Hana stopped him. I've been studying Earth's history, she said. Your people have a saying. A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. I think I understand it now. Sun Ki nodded. Life on Earth taught us that challenges make us stronger. But working with your crew taught me something too. Sometimes the best way to face those challenges is together, combining different strengths. Captain Jaiho made one final ship-wide announcement. Crew of the Starlight Dawn, remember this mission. We call the Deathworlder for help, expecting danger. Instead, we found a new way of thinking, a new kind of strength. Let this be a lesson. In space, our differences are not barriers. They are bridges to understanding. As Sun Ki walked through the station's corridors toward his next assignment, he heard people talking about the Starlight Dawn's adventure. The story was already spreading. How a human navigator had helped a Nilarian crew survive by combining Earth's ancient wisdom with advanced alien technology. His tablet beeped with a new message. More ships were requesting human navigators for their crews. The Federation was starting to understand that sometimes you needed someone who had evolved on a dangerous world to help you survive the dangers of space. Back on the Starlight Dawn, Hana installed the new navigation program they had created with Sun Ki. It combined the precision of Nilarian technology with the adaptability of human instinct. On her desk sat a small Earth compass, a gift from Sun Ki. Safe travels, she whispered to the stars, using the Earth phrase Sun Ki had taught them. In the viewport's reflection, she saw her antenna move in a way that mimicked a human smile. The Starlight Dawn's next mission would begin soon. They would face new challenges, explore new regions of space. But now they had a new perspective, one that combined the best of both worlds. After all, sometimes getting lost was just the first step to finding a better way forward. And somewhere in the vastness of space, a human navigator smiled, knowing that Deathworlder was no longer a word of fear, but a badge of honor.